Brill. Thank you. Thank you, Jez, and thank you everyone for joining. So this lunch and learn is going to be a little bit about the impact of plastic pollution, how it occurs, why it is occurring, and really why it's important that we reduce our plastic consumption. And then we've got another webinar that's later on in the program that talks a little bit more about the practical steps that you can do to reduce your plastic use. So there we go. So in the wider program, where does this webinar fit? So it's really about using resources wisely, being responsible with things that we procure. That's at work and at home as well. So first of all, I thought I'd start off with some headlines. So plastic is a global problem. You can see that in the variety of headlines that I've got here. So there's headlines about how this affects the wildlife around us, the animals that live in the environment, how it affects us as humans, especially this article about microplastics in the human blood is quite a scary one. And yeah, so it really does impact us in lots of different ways. And hopefully over this next half an hour, I'll break that down a little bit. So plastic is a versatile and material. It's very cheap, but relatively cheap to produce. And that's why we use it for so many different uses. I made this list just sat here at my desk, looking out the window and looking around me at the things that we use plastic for. And it's a great material. It's relatively cheap. It's moldable. It's durable. It's lightweight. And yeah, it's everything from the clothes that we're wearing to the contact lenses I've got in so that I can see. So to put this in context as well, for the blues in the audience as well, to put some numbers to this, the amount of plastic that is being produced in the world every year is just increasing explosively. You can see that in this graph. So from 1950, we're around 2 million tons of plastic being produced. Up into 2021, we're looking at 390 million tons of plastic, and you can see that forecasted number, without sort of any action from us, is just skyrocketing. So where is this plastic being used? So the majority of the plastic is in packaging. So around 44% of this is for packaging. The second is building and construction industry, as well as cars, automotive, electrical and electronics as well. So the laptop and everything that I'm using at the moment. So when we think about plastic reduction, the reason that packaging gets sort of the most amount of stick is this is where we can make the most amount of impact when it comes to reducing our plastic. That 44% of plastic that we are producing just goes towards packaging. So I thought I'd just start off with a question to get started. Just put your answers in the chat box, and I've got my phone. So estimates, how long do we think it takes for one plastic bag to decompose in the natural environment? There's some variation in this number depending on sort of the environment and the plastic type, but just as an average, throw out some numbers in the chat box. How many years do we think it could take for a plastic bag to decompose? So yeah, a lot of big numbers coming through. I think I've seen a few correct answers. So the answer is it's actually 1,000 years for a plastic bag to decompose. And some people would query that at all and say whether the plastic bag fully decomposes completely anyway. So you can really see the problem with plastic, that we're using it at such a large scale and it's going to stay in the environment for such a long time. And that's where we can really see that that's the impact of plastic. It shouldn't be in our environment at that scale. So what is the impact of our global plastic consumption? We've said it's a great resource, but however, it's plastic that we are using and the single-use plastic we are using is at such scale. So I thought I'd take you through a few different scenarios of what really happens to our plastic waste. So yeah, three different scenarios, three different plastic bottles. How do they end up being disposed of? So first, to look at the environmental impact of the plastic industry is to take a step back and actually look at the manufacturing. So the process for oil for to make plastic is through crude oil. So most of the plastic we are using today is synthetic, so it's man-made. It's made from the processing of crude oil. So this is extracted from the earth as crude oil, and it undergoes a process of refining and to select all the molecules that we do want. And then this is polymerized, so building up these long chains of molecules that we know as plastic. I won't go into loads of detail about that. It was a bit of a refresh for me, thinking back to chemistry lessons on that. But the key point here is really that the manufacturing process is really energy and water intensive. We're going to be releasing a lot of greenhouse gases and pollutants into the atmosphere as well. So if we look at scenario number one, so for plastic bottle number one, like most of our plastic waste, this will end up in landfill. Depending on where in the world this landfill is, there's regulations on the landfill use and to sort of protect the environment, protect human health. However, an element of this is just unavoidable. We know landfills are really not good for the environment. They're a major source of pollution. They're an eyesore. They're going to be releasing a lot of greenhouse gas emissions as materials are decomposing. And for bottle number one in this scenario, it's going to enter landfill. It's going to be compressed under lots of weight, and it will very, very slowly start to decompose. So that 1,000 years we're looking at for it to fully decompose, if at all. And another issue with landfill is the leachate that forms. So as the materials are decomposing, this leachate is formed where water is filtering through the landfill waste. So water could enter landfill just as rain or surface runoff water. And as this filters through landfill, you create leachate. So the water actually acts as a sponge and it will absorb the toxins in the waste, and it will actually carry this into the soils, into the groundwater, potentially into rivers and across ecosystems, with the potential of carrying that toxic waste, those toxic pollutants in the waste, in plastic, out into the ecosystems, potential to harm wildlife as well. So bottle number two doesn't undergo the usual disposal route. It's not going to go to landfill. Potentially litter can escape, maybe as it's being transported to landfill. This plastic bottle number two might have escaped, or potentially it was littered on the side of a road. And this plastic can just be carried by wind, by water, and it often can end up in streams, rivers, drains. Drains are a key one as well. You know, all the water that we use in our houses, that goes into the drainage system, it goes into the water cycle, it goes into the environment. And this statistic I thought was quite surprising, actually, that 80% of plastic that is in the ocean originated from land. So that's where we've got this careless and improper waste disposal that we can have result in plastic ending up in the sea. So once plastic ends up in the sea, it can often end up in these garbage patches, which are sort of formed. You see in this map where they've got the arrows are sort of swirling around. These are called like the gyres, ocean gyres. They're like big whirlpools, and they're going to pull objects in that are in the ocean, and they're going to accumulate into this sort of large patch, this plastic. So the biggest accumulation of ocean plastic is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's an estimated surface area of 1.6 million square kilometres, which is for context is the area 3 times the size of France. So you can see that's just a huge collection of plastic, and that is the biggest one. However, smaller bodies of water are now sort of developing their own garbage patches, especially along routes that are heavily trafficked with shipping lanes and the fishing industry as well. So the plastic that ends up in these garbage patches, it is a mixture of these larger pieces of plastic that have come from potentially land activities, for example, plastic bottle number two, my example, but also the fishing industry, and microplastics as well, which I'll come to in the next slide. But all of this plastic, it comes together in this accumulation, and in the ocean, it sort of develops this cloudy plastic soup. And you can imagine there's lots of impacts for this, especially for wildlife. There are several projects in progress to clean up these garbage patches, especially the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. I just didn't have time to cover them today, but I did put a resource at the end if people are interested in reading a little bit more about some of the successes around that. So I mentioned microplastics. So plastic never degrades. It's that what that means is it can just fragment into even smaller pieces and actually until it cannot be seen with the naked eye. Um, that's when plastic really becomes a problem because when it's at this such small scale, it can spread everywhere. And when I say everywhere, I mean that microplastics have been found sort of at the top of Mount Everest, all the way down to like the deepest points of the Mariana Trench, the deepest trench in the ocean. So microplastics can be formed by this fragmentation process. So that's just plastic sort of being broken up over time when it's really slowly decomposing over those 1,000 years. That can just be done by in water and in the air as well, and with the sunlight as well, especially in the ocean. That's when you get this plastic fragmentating into microplastics. So some other sources of microplastic as well. When you're washing your clothes, your synthetic clothing, you're going to get small clothing fabrics that are going to be created there. And then again, going into the drainage system, they're going to end up in our water cycle. Microbeads in cosmetic products have now been banned. However, there will be some that still exist out in the environment. And then you can also get the small plastic granules that from the plastic industry sometimes do spill and escape as well. The problem with microplastics, number one, they get absolutely everywhere. They're smaller, they can move much more than a plastic bottle, for example. And number two is actually when these microplastics are in water and air, again, they're going to act like a sponge and they're going to attract and absorb toxins in the environment. So that could be the leachate, so what's in our landfill from plastic bottle number one. But they also could be absorbing pathogens, fertilizers, other chemicals that are occurring in our environment, and they're going to be carrying those with them everywhere. So like I said, everywhere from Everest to the bottom of the ocean. So swallowed microplastics and toxins can poison animals and can eventually infect the whole food web. But larger bits of plastic are also a problem for wildlife. This famous picture of the albatross chick where it's been fed plastic from its parents, and what that picture I feel like really shows is that animals have just not been able to adjust their behavior and evolve quick enough in the rate that plastic has just become such a problem. The parents didn't learn quick enough that this plastic they were feeding their chick would eventually become fatal. That's why we often have these so many issues with plastic affecting wildlife. Another, sorry for the sad pictures, there are a little gloom, but the swallowed plastic is going to be consumed. When it's consumed, it's going to sit in their stomach. It's going to reduce that feeling of hunger. Animals are going to have less energy. They're going to weaken and will eventually pass. For example, as well, the hedgehog there that's been caught up in some bottle packaging, but also really like Another famous example is discarded nets. So that's called ghost fishing, and we get animals caught in discarded nets from the fishing industry. And that means the animals got reduced mobility, they can starve, drown, suffocate, all these horrible effects. And then also the example around animals consuming microplastic. This can eventually and possibly will end up in the human food chain. So when we've got these tiny bits of microplastic, for example, in this picture I've got here, in the ocean, plankton are going to be consuming those, they're going to be eating those. That plankton will then eventually become the prey of a fish. That fish will be eating lots of plankton, and this is where you can see this buildup of plastic in the food chain that eventually can and will affect humans. So that's the process of bioaccumulation, that process of where plastic can infiltrate the food web. Recent research this is only very recent, as in like the last few months. Microplastics that are in the soil and in groundwater systems can be absorbed by fruit and veg. So if that's in the soil where they're growing, that can actually be absorbed into the root system and then for potentially ending up on our plates as well. So yeah, there's a human impact to plastic pollution. There's also a financial impact. This cost that I've got up here is the cost of the impact on tourism. Nobody wants to be on the beach with all this plastic waste sunbathing when they're sunbathing next to them. But also there's an impact on fisheries and also actually the cost of these cleanup operations as well. This cost of 13 billion doesn't include impacts to human health and the marine ecosystem as well. There's just not enough research on that at the moment. But yeah, the way that we can reduce this cost is in intercepting the plastic before it ends up in the ocean and reducing our plastic consumption in the first place. So bottle 3 has got a slightly happier note than bottle number 1 and 2. So plastic bottle number 3 is destined for recycling. So this could just be recycling at home. This will go off to a recycling facility where it is sorted by plastic type. It will be cleaned, and then it can either be shredded into flakes or melted into pellets, and then that can be molded into new products. So plastic bottle number 3 could eventually become a carrier bag or some clothes. So the real benefits of recycling our plastic, we've got less waste that has been sent to landfill, and the key one is that we're reducing the consumption of energy when we're producing new plastic. That's the key thing here with recycling, is that we're just reducing the consumption and the need to make new plastic. So plastic recycling sounds like it is a solution. It's not quite the solution. The scale of plastic that we are producing and are using produces a lot of waste. Waste is really complicated and expensive, and as we've seen, it's potentially toxic as well. So it is really difficult to manage. So looking at this pie chart, so for the 9.2 billion tons of plastic produced between 1950 and 2017, the majority of this plastic waste is going to end up in landfill. So going back to my plastic bottle number 1 and all of those impacts, the plastic bottle number 3 that was recycled, that's a far smaller chunk. So that's just 7% of our plastic waste that is recycled. And the issue really here is that our planet can just not cope with this amount of plastic polluting the environment, and that's when it really calls on us to reduce our plastic pollution by reducing our plastic consumption. And we've seen a real urgency in this in recent years. Just to bring this back to context to ground control, just using the chat box again, I've got my phone so I can see some of the answers coming in. Thinking about what plastic we use in the offices as well as out on site? What plastic are you encountering at work? If you just share that in the chat box. I have a plastic project that's going on in the background of this, so hopefully I can steal some of your ideas. But also we're looking at what alternatives are there to the plastic at ground control that we procure. And also where we are using plastic, can we actually reuse that or recycle that wherever possible? So yeah, so just feel free to add as many into the chat box. What plastic are we using? Yeah, so stationery, your pens, folders, everything. Tea bags is another one where you've got microplastic in there. Food packaging, yeah. Yeah, sorry, Tracy, that it's quite depressing. Hopefully can, yeah. Pipes and furniture as well. Yeah. So yeah, plastic is all around us, and it's yeah, is key at ground control as well. Um, so yeah, sorry that it feels hopefully doesn't feel too depressing, and hopefully don't feel too powerless. But the way that we can really impact and reduce plastic pollution is how do we reduce our plastic consumption? So like I did in that first slide at the beginning of reviewing the plastic that you have in your personal space. Um, and then you can start to apply the principles of the waste hierarchy. So first looking at where we can reduce the waste at source. So example could be for me and my contact lenses. I used to have daily contact lenses. I've now swapped to monthlies to reduce the amount of plastic I'm using. If I want to completely avoid the plastic altogether, I could get my eyes lasered, but it's quite expensive and I'm a little bit scared. And then also with the plastic containers that your lenses come in, you can recycle those, but you need to take them to your Boots or Superdrug. And yeah, the key thing here, and this will be covered in more detail at the session that we have later in the program, but is to really take small practical steps when you're looking at reducing your plastic, and then eventually building up good habits and that plastic-free lifestyle, that zero waste lifestyle as well. So just to end, I've got a few resources just to signpost. The first one is a good resource you can put in your postcode and you can see what can be recycled where. For example, it's not just plastic, it's also like batteries as well, things like that. Also soft plastics, so the plastic, for example, bread bins, bread like bags, they can be recycled now, and there's more information where and how to recycle those different bits on that link. And also for more information about ocean cleanup, so some of the projects cleaning up the oceans, there's a link there. Ground Control are or partners of the Supply Chain Sustainability Schools. There's free resources on there, just to maybe signpost the one around plastic is of interest. And then also looking ahead to next week. Next week, we're going to be talking about some inspirational women in environment and sustainability to celebrate International Women's Day. And then, yeah, to link in with Plastic Free July, which is a global celebration to try and reduce plastic. We've got another lunch and learn. So yeah, what are some of those practical steps that you can take to reduce your plastic consumption? So yeah, that's all from me presentation wise. If there's any questions, I will do my best to answer. And if anyone has any bright ideas or concerns about plastic within ground control, definitely reach out to me and I can steal some of your good ideas for my plastic project.
Brilliant. Well done, Liv. I don't think you've got questions, but I think what you can see is you've inspired people to share stuff and people to chip in, which is, to be honest, as of much value, if not more. I can see here you've got people giving some tips and there's some images and stuff. Clearly, I've learned something because I put that in at the beginning. not going to lie, didn't know that plastic came from oil, but I can't be the only person that didn't know that. Hopefully, please don't judge. So, guys, if you've got questions, now would be a great time to pop them into chat. But don't do that if you haven't. There's no need to do that. Obviously, Liv's extended the opportunity to reach out to her direct as well. We'll always do what we always do, which is film this, edit it, and then load it in, and then it will join our playlist of Lunch and Learns, which is now, I think it's up to about 8, which is brilliant. So it just means everybody can access this. Anything that you'd like me to share? So Callum said some great tips. I definitely learned from that. I hope you don't mind, but I think I'd also like to give you some feedback on how you presented. I thought you were really clear, like really clear, absolutely perfect. So really well done, because it is difficult to do that, but I thought you came across really, really excellently, Olive.